Which shoe is better to hoop in? The Adidas Harden Volume 6 or the Nike ZoomFreak 3? Today we're putting the newest models from James Harden and Giannis Antetokounmpo's signature shoe lines head to head to see how they compare. But really quick, if this is your first time checking us out, feel free to drop a follow or subscribe wherever you're watching and give this video a like. We would greatly appreciate that. So starting off with the box and the price, the Harden 6s have that HV.VI on the front, standing for Harden Volume 6. Along with that, it's going to be a faint splash design kind of built into the box. And then Giannis' shoes are going to come in an orange box with this player logo kind of off-centered in the bottom corner. Pretty simple setup for both designs. But as for pricing, the Harden 6s made a $10 price jump from the 5s, and they're now retailing for $140. The ZoomFreak 3s are going to retail a little bit below that at $120, so not bad price for both shoes. Harden's fall a little bit more middle of the scale, with the ZoomFreak 3s being on the slightly cheaper side. So doing a quick rundown for the appearance on these shoes and starting off with the colorways, today we're checking out the Adidas Harden Volume 6 Mist Aqua versus the Nike ZoomFreak 3 in this Nike color scheme. So starting off with the Harden 6, you're going to get a Harden patch at the bottom of the lacing setup. And then these have a blue lace right above that that's also going to run behind the pull tab on the back side of the shoe. And Adidas kept the Achilles pillows or pads in Harden's line this year. After having those same thick pads along the sock liner in the Harden 5s, they honestly seem a little bit bigger or just like more noticeable on this year's Harden 6. But there's also going to be some waves kind of built into the midsole that I personally think looks a lot better than the kind of flattened out midsole that was on the Harden Volume 5. Just kind of made that design look a little bit too bulky. So as far as the appearance goes, the Harden 6 is still not going to be my favorite, but I think it does look better than the 5s for sure. But switching it over to the ZoomFreak 3s, Nike kind of added the strap to this year's model that wasn't there on the 2, which does give these a nice added touch, and they even put Giannis' nickname right on the inside part of it. So the strap's always a nice feature to add, just kind of opens up to some creative options, I guess, for the shoe in my opinion. But that's really the only piece that they switched on this year's design compared to the 2s that I did actually like. So these are going to get a reverse swoosh on there that I think is a little bit too small. It's going to be kind of tough for them to replicate his first shoe that had that big reverse swoosh going onto the midsole. That's like one of my favorite designs for a first signature shoe that I've ever seen in a while. But the midsole like setup is going to be a little bit funky too, with those curves kind of built in my opinion. But you're going to get some Nike text on the tongue to kind of reference the colorway name. So honestly, not a bad look. It's not going to be my favorite. I guess neither of these models are, but now let's go ahead and see how each of these shoes hold up on the court. So getting into more of the materials and the performance side for these shoes, and starting off with the cushioning. For the Harden 6, I mean, if you want to talk about a shoe line that desperately needed an upgrade in this category, the Harden 5 from last year, that was just one of the stiffer shoes that I've played in. And the Harden 6 isn't going to like blow you away with the super soft feel, but the boost cushioning, it does feel a lot better in this year's model compared to last. And I know that the Harden 5s kind of tested out like a future natural process, and they missed pretty big on it in my opinion, but I will settle for improvement, and these do feel a little bit better to play in. Still not going to be as soft as the 4s, you know, from a few years back, the Harden Volume 4. So I mean, I guess this shoe line is kind of trending in the wrong direction as far as comfort goes. But now switching it over to check out the ZoomFreak 3s, they did make some improvements to the comfort on this year's design compared to the 2s. So the front half of the shoe is going to be hollowed out, and that's where you have 2 Zoom Air units. That's going to account for most of the soft feel that comes from this shoe. You're not going to get a lot of cushioning in the back half, and that's not really a huge deal since a lot of the time is spent whenever you're playing basketball on the forefoot of your shoes anyways, kind of on your toes. But it is kind of clear whenever you have these on that most of the soft feel does come from the front half of the shoe, and normally I prefer something, you know, a little bit more balanced. But I mean, between the cushioning between the ZoomFreak 3s and the Harden 6, I think they do feel a little bit better, to be honest. For the materials in the support, the upper on the Harden 6 has a lot of different materials being used from the 5s, which had more of like a plastic casing feel. These are going to be made up of a softer textile that is much easier to scuff. I found that out the first day I played in these. It just got 2 massive scuffs right up the middle of the shoe. So it's not really a suede material, but it is kind of it feels kind of close to it on like the base that makes up the upper. And Adidas did keep the Achilles pads in Harden's shoe line just like they had in the 5s, and they are pretty big and they extend out from the shoe a good amount, but it didn't feel unnatural to play in, which is something that, you know, I was initially a little concerned about. But the support is where the Harden 6 fixed a lot of problems. I just could not keep my heel in the shoe last year. Like, it was constantly slipping out, but I haven't had that same problem in this year's model. The laces kind of feed through a gray overlay on the upper that helps tighten your foot into the design, and that helps a lot with the support. And then the blue waves also come up from the midsole to help a little bit with the lateral containment. So that was an area that needed a lot of improvement on Harden's model, was the support, and they did get it here. But now looking at the ZoomFreak 3s, Nike did add the strap for the first time to Giannis's line, but other than that, the materials are pretty solid, but nothing really to brag about. The upper is really light and the ventilation is good for your foot, but I will say the support feels a little bit less impressive on this design because of that. The materials just don't give you the most secure feel. The upper can move around a little bit on harder cuts and movement, so support suffers a little bit just because of like the materials being used, but there are some other features that kind of are there to specifically help you with the support, such as the strap being there for some added lockdown, and you're also going to have an outrigger in that spot on the midsole where it says has that air text kind of built in. That's going to give you a wider base and also help brace your foot within the shoe. So the midsole does also have like that wave design around the heel that acts a little bit like a heel counter to keep your foot secure. So I wouldn't say support is a bad piece to this shoe. They still hold up pretty solid. Between the two models, the ZoomFreak 3 is going to be significantly lighter, weighing only 404 grams for a size 10.5, which is 100 grams lighter than the Harden 6, which weighs in at 512 grams for the same size. So normally I prefer shoes on the lighter size, just makes moving around on the court feel a little bit better, and the ZoomFreak 3 is set up to assist you better for that. So to finish off with traction, just to jump back to the Harden 5s one last time, it was impossible for me to get any grip on last year's model. They were just an absolute dust collector, but the Harden 6 did make some improvements here. But I mean, honestly, getting worse wasn't really an option. But I do think it helped that Adidas went with more of a traditional herringbone setup, which allowed these to take a step forward. And I wouldn't call them sticky, but they do grip the floor well on nicer courts, and they are pretty decent on a dustier court too, which is what I end up filming on most of the time. But for the ZoomFreak 3s, they did fix a few of the inconsistencies from last year's ZoomFreak 2 model, but it didn't go away altogether. And honestly, I'm pretty harsh on these computer-generated designs just because it never really plays all that well for me. I still think there's some room for improvement on Giannis's line as far as traction goes. I just haven't been super impressed with the traction on his last few models. But I mean, now to finish off with sizing, both of these shoes are going to be good for the width, maybe the Hardens being a little bit wider, but the ZoomFreak 3s are going to be good for the length. The Harden 6s are going to run on the longer side, so I went true to size and I definitely have more room than I want. So I would recommend going probably a half size down on Harden's line, as is pretty common to have to do with James Harden's shoe line. So for the final ratings and starting off with the appearance, both of these shoes are okay, but neither one's really my favorite. So I'm just going to start off with a tie here. For cushioning, the Harden 6s definitely improved here, but so did the ZoomFreak 3, and I think they play a little bit softer overall, so I'm going to go with the ZoomFreak 3 for cushioning. As for materials, both of these models kind of switched up what was being used, but neither one feels cheap, so I'm actually just going to keep this section as a tie. But for the support, Harden's would have been crushed here last year, but they did clean up a lot of stuff to kind of match up well with the strap and the outrigger being used on the ZoomFreak 3s, so I'm going to go with the tie here again. But for traction, I am going to go with the Harden 6s for this category. They do feel a little bit better in this area, and they definitely improved from the Harden 5s. The ZoomFreak 3 stayed about the same, and I'm still looking for them to do something a little bit different with the traction pattern. But I am going to go with the ZoomFreak 3 as the better shoe to hoop in. And this is a pretty close competition where each shoe is better. It's definitely not by a lot. So I kind of circle back to the ZoomFreak 3s being much lighter to play in. That is something that I personally like and kind of look for in a shoe. The Harden Volume 6 is still going to be a clear upgrade from the 5s, but as with most shoes, there still are some things that can be fixed. Still two solid performing shoes here though. Thank you guys for taking some time to watch. If you want to buy the Nike ZoomFreak 3, just click the link here on screen, or we have links for both shoes down below or in our bio, so feel free to check that out. But until next review, I'm Landon from Shoewear. Peace.